Tu taua mai I raro, tu taua mai I roto, tu taua mai I waho, kia tau ai te mauri tū, te mauri ora ki te katoa, homa e hui e taeki e. I summon from above, from below, from within, from the surrounding environment and the universe, the energy to enrich us all present, unified, connected and blessed.
Tēnā koutou, I ngā āhuatanga o te wā Matariki. Welcome to this Discussing Tourism webinar. My name is Steve Hanrahan. I'm the Advocacy Manager for TIA and Facilitator for today's webinar. The focus today is on the launch of TIA's Tourism Election Plan 2020. Today's presentation will cover the priority actions TIA wants from the incoming government to revive and revitalise the tourism industry, and how you can use the election campaign to highlight the challenges facing our industry. Joining us today are Gráinne Trout, the Chair of TIA, and Chris Roberts, Chief Executive of TIA. The webinar is scheduled for 30 minutes. It may run slightly longer if there are more questions. Please note the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen will be inviting questions later in the webinar. To begin, I'd like to introduce the new Chair of TIA, Gráinne Trout, to give an introduction today. Welcome, Gráinne.
Thanks, Steve, and tēnā koutou. Hi, everyone. It's lovely to meet, if we can call it meeting, many of you for the first time today. I joined the TIA board in May, and to say the least, it's been an interesting time to take up the role of chair, given the unprecedented challenges the country and the industry have faced and continue to face, of course. In my view, perhaps the most important role TIA plays is to advocate for the sector, ensuring the critical importance of tourism to our economy and to our people remains top of mind, and that the concerns of the industry are clearly represented. There is obviously no more important time to do this than in the lead up to an election. I think the team has done an excellent job in pulling together the Revive and Revitalise action plan today, and that's the focus of this webinar. It has the full support of your board. It's a clear and coherent document, and I hope you agree it represents, or will agree if you haven't already seen it, the critical concerns of our sector very well. So it's great to be here. I look forward to your input, and I'll hand back to Steve and Chris to take us through the strategy. Thank you.
Thank you, Gráinne. And now I'd like to hand over to Chris to take us through TIA's Tourism Election Action Plan. Chris, over to you. Chris, you're on mute.
Thanks, Steve. I was trying to not make any noise. Right, let's start that again. Thank you, everyone, and for taking the time to get to know our action plan for this year's election. I think we all know that a vibrant visitor economy has been a central feature of New Zealand's economic success. The pandemic, of course, has been the biggest shock ever faced by our tourism industry, impacting on every town, city, and region in the country. But the revival and revitalisation of tourism is essential for New Zealand's future well-being. Prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, tourism was our biggest export earner. It was supporting more than 1 in 7 jobs, almost 400,000 people employed across New Zealand. Today, until last year, of course, total annual tourism expenditure in New Zealand was around $41 billion. That's $112 million per day, and tourism directly and indirectly was almost 10% of GDP. All of that changed with COVID-19. And as these regional spend numbers for the 3 months of March, April, May show, no region of New Zealand has escaped the impact of the COVID pandemic. Those numbers in red are pretty severe and show that the entire country, in terms of the spend that comes from tourism, has suffered. Extraordinary times call for extraordinary measures. Tourism was the first industry to be hit by the pandemic, and it will be the last to recover. So the government elected in September 2020 must utilise all of its resources and work alongside the private sector to revive and revitalise our tourism industry for the benefit of our people and Aotearoa. The immediate need is to prioritise the survival and recovery of tourism businesses. This is also an opportunity to make some bold changes to fix some long-standing systemic issues that have compromised our desire to build a truly sustainable tourism future. Tourism is a highly resilient industry full of very passionate people, and we know that with targeted support, some system fixes and a shared vision, the industry will once again make an essential contribution to New Zealand's success. TIA has identified specific actions required from the incoming government under 6 categories: partnership, vision, regions, natural resources, knowledge and people. And I'll just run through each of those 6 categories in turn. In terms of vision, while the immediate outlook is of course very uncertain, the industry's longer term ambitions remain relevant. TIA's Tourism 2025 and Beyond, a Sustainable Growth Framework, Kaupapa Whakapakari Tāpoi, sets a vision of growing a sustainable tourism industry that benefits New Zealanders, and that vision still remains relevant. The government's commitment to tourism is directed by the New Zealand Aotearoa Government Tourism Strategy. It's very well aligned to the industry's own framework, and a set of joint priorities have been agreed already between industry and government, and those priorities should continue to be a focus for the incoming government. In terms of partnership, we need a public sector that works with the tourism industry to address immediate needs and achieve our long-term aspirations. The incoming government needs to make an immediate commitment to targeted support for businesses who are directly impacted by border restrictions. We're not arguing that the border restrictions are not needed, but we have to recognise the impact that they're having on businesses across our sector. Safety comes first, but we must ease travel restrictions as soon as it's safe to do so. Industry needs to be, and it wants to be, involved in decisions that are taken across government. And we also want to see compliance burdens eased. That's always a refrain from our industry, but particularly at this time, we can't have any unnecessary costs imposed on our businesses. Our border taxes and charges that exist have to be looked at, and we want a categorical assurance from any incoming government that there will be no new tourism taxes. In terms of regions, tourism takes place in local communities, and it provides jobs, regional economic growth and vibrancy. So it's essential that tourism provides real benefits to the communities in which it operates. Alongside that, local government has a critical role to play in managing and enhancing local tourism experiences. And local government needs central government support to play its part in the rebuild of tourism. The success and well-being of our tourism industry is intrinsically tied to our environment. Our landscapes and scenery are our greatest draw card. The Department of Conservation, DOC, is both a protector of our unique biodiversity and also a highly influential part of the tourism system. Unfortunately, the key legislation governing its operations dates from the 1980s, and it hasn't been responding well to 21st century pressures and opportunities. We believe it's time to take the brave decision to review and replace outdated legislation. And New Zealand can show global leadership through industry and government working together to foster environmentally regenerative tourism. Freshwater, climate change, carbon reduction, these big issues that we face as a country are all critical issues as well for the sustainability of tourism. With regards to knowledge and insight, The tourism industry has long suffered from a dearth of research, science and innovation, what's known as RSI. Tourism is largely unrecognised by our public sector science system, and there's no mechanism to access funding from other sources, including from the industry itself. We believe a fundamental review of the tourism data system is needed to be kicked off by the incoming government. Last but not least, our people. And as tourism revives, jobs and career opportunities will re-emerge. We're very aware that a lot of people have lost their jobs in recent weeks, but there is a risk of labour and skill shortages quite soon. If we permanently lose staff displaced by COVID-19, we have many of our migrant workers going home or being encouraged to go home, and we risk in a reasonably short period being back into a significant shortage of skilled staff. We also need recognition that workers from overseas will always be part of the mix, filling jobs when suitable New Zealanders can't be found. And we need to take various measures to encourage participation in tourism training. There are identified issues with our training system, with the way tourism is regarded in our education system that we knew before COVID came along, and we've still got to tackle those issues working with government. So those are our 6 areas and our 37 specific priorities for the incoming government. So how can you get involved? What can you do as a business? Well, before the general election, there'll be public meetings and other opportunities to discuss the events of the day, the issues of the day with candidates. Get along to those meetings. Ask your local candidates where they stand on tourism issues. Share this tourism election action plan with your local candidates. Discuss the importance of tourism with your local MP and candidates. And you can go to our website for tips on how you can lobby MPs and others who are standing to be your representative. There is a role that you can play directly in this discussion over the coming weeks. Our election plan's intended to be comprehensive, but realistic, but also challenging, because these are the most challenging of times. The wero has been laid down for the incoming government. We trust that the challenge will be accepted, and together with government, we can work on the revival and revitalisation of tourism in Aotearoa. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Chris, for that overview of TIA's tourism election action plan. For attendees, please send through any questions that you might have on the election plan, or questions for Chris or possibly for Gráinne also. There is a question here, so we will kick into it now. Chris, this one for you. The wage subsidy ends in August, and ITOs, inbound tour operators in particular, are suffering, and there was a forum yesterday with Tech NZ. Most have failed to engage the domestic market for varying reasons. What are TIA doing to lobby in regards to targeted support in terms of dollars and specific assistance with the wage subsidy coming to an end?
Yeah, thanks, Steve. Well, the very first point in our election plan is that the incoming government must prioritise the survival and recovery of tourism businesses that have been devastated by our closed border. Now, we're not obviously waiting for mid-September to be advocating for that. We're talking to government all the time, and we are very aware that the wage subsidy has been taken up by the majority of our businesses. The government has signalled it's not intending to extend the wage subsidy again. So our question is, if not a wage subsidy, what will be provided? We'll be doing some more work on that in the coming week, ahead of the election, talking to the current government about what their intentions are in terms of ongoing support for our industry. But we have to accept their public statements that they're not intending to extend the wage subsidy. So the question for us is, if not a wage subsidy, what is support mechanism that the government's intending to use for tourism, hospitality, event, travel businesses at this time.
Great, thanks, Chris. Please keep sending your questions through. Another one here, Chris, and this is just in regards to the presentation that Chris has given. So just for participants to note that the election plan is now available on TIA's website, www.tia.org.nz, so you can download the action plan from there. Chris, a question just in regards to tourism policies from the other political parties. Are you hearing anything from the political parties yet around what their tourism policies might look like or things they might be thinking about?
Certainly we've been engaged with the other political parties, well, with all the political parties over the last while, and shared with them a lot of the draft material that's been released today. I would hope, expect that a lot of what we're asking for will be reflected in the individual tourism policies of those parties, because we believe there's nothing particularly political about the points we have to make about what needs to be done. And there's a lot of things in here that could be taken up and championed by different political parties. We don't necessarily, well, we don't want tourism to be a political football. What we would like to see is as much alignment between all of the parties on what needs to be done as possible. So that's why we've actually shared quite a lot of this information already with the tourism spokespeople from the different parties, and would be delighted to see it reflected and cut and pasted into their own policies if they wish to do that.
Mm-hmm. Great, thanks, Chris. Please keep your questions coming through. Another one here. Chris, there's an assumption here that we are probably looking at Kelvin Davis or Todd McClay as our next tourism minister. How engaged are they in any proposed tourism recovery plan? Has this action plan been shared? What was their reaction?
Well, certainly both are engaged, as are other tourism spokespeople from political parties. I mean, the minister, being in the minister's role, we have a close relationship with his office and with the minister, and that relationship, of course, is based around the fact that he's currently in that position and has the ability to take actions now. With regard to Todd McClay, he's certainly stated publicly that if National was to lead the next government, he fully intends or expects to be the tourism minister, and that has been, I haven't been able to check that with the latest leader of the National Party, but the last couple of leaders of the National Party were accepting of that. So we would presume it would be Todd if it was a national-led government. And he's very engaged, has ahead of some of their initial announcements on their policy, has been engaging with us to understand our viewpoint. So I think there's a very good level of engagement with both those people.
Right. So the next question is on a similar vein. Chris, you may have answered it. If the incumbent government is re-elected, what is your game plan to ensure a senior minister is appointed to the tourism portfolio? Sure.
Look, it's been our policy, I think, probably for at least the last two elections, and stemming from the time going back a while now when John Key first took on the tourism portfolio, and we recognised the long-term benefits of having, at that time, the Prime Minister as the tourism minister. So we've always taken the position that tourism should go to a senior minister, that ideally on the front bench, and it has been that way for some time now, since John Key first took it on. And we perhaps need to remember that prior to that, tourism was often held by quite a lowly ranked cabinet minister, often 15th or 20th in the cabinet rankings might be where the tourism portfolio sat. We've enjoyed now quite a long period where it's had a seniority to it, but I think there's no more important time than right now for tourism to be sitting on that front bench alongside the other senior considerations. Also, in this action plan, we're calling for a continuation of the Tourism Recovery Ministers Group. That was an initiative announced in the budget. So there are a group of ministers who are meeting regularly to discuss tourism matters, including the Conservation Minister, the Minister of Māori Development, the Undersecretary for Regional Development, Tourism Minister, and Finance Minister. So having that cross-cabinet group of ministers getting together to discuss specifically just tourism issues, we think needs to continue. It's a recovery group, but the recovery is going to be a long, difficult process for tourism. So we think that ministers group needs to be maintained by the incoming government.
Sure, thanks. Chris, you might have touched on this before. Do we think we can get the wage subsidy extended for tourism, asked for in the last survey?
Look, we haven't given up on that. Our views as expressed to government in various channels is that our members have been very loud and clear in their position that the wage subsidy has been the most helpful thing that the government has done to date, and they would like, in a majority, almost 3/4 of our members would like it to continue. We have to put a degree of realism over that, because the Prime Minister and the Finance Minister have been pretty clear that they're not intending to extend the current wage subsidy. There's perhaps the smallest of cracks open in that door, that they could yet look at a very targeted wage subsidy that might apply to businesses impacted by the closed border. So there's a slim chance of an extension of the wage subsidy. We're not giving up on that possibility, but my feeling is that they're probably tending to look at something else to assist our industry that's not in the form of a wage subsidy. So we'll keep those discussions, keep that pressure on.
Right, and just sort of finishing that theme there, Chris, there is a question come through about the suggestion to use the unemployment benefit for those who have lost their job as an extension of the wage subsidy, so we don't lose productivity with people sitting at home. So something to consider also, I guess. Yeah, I mean, the current two schemes of the assistance available currently is, of course, the wage subsidy, which will be a total of 20 weeks, the 12 plus 8. And then there's the other transition assistance that's available to staff who have actually been made redundant, and they can get, I think, for 12 weeks, the same rate, effectively, $490 after tax, to help them transition into the workforce once they've been let go. We should recognise that keeping your staff on is not going to be the answer for every business. The staff, especially at the staff levels you had before COVID-19. For many businesses, the hibernation option is the best that's going to present itself at the moment. And what does that mean? Typically, that means you've reduced your workforce quite substantially. You're keeping on those key staff that you want to have there to get your business going again. That means the wage subsidy perhaps loses some of its relevance. You might still like that wage subsidy for the smaller workforce you've got, but your key focus is hibernating your business, keeping the skeleton staff on, and being assisted by government to see through this next period and being there to be able to hit the ground running when the opportunity arises. Right, thanks, Chris. Please keep your questions coming through. There's some more here. This one around data, Chris. So Jim notes, thanks for pushing the need for robust data. As you know, we absolutely need a complete dashboard of data, and we need it now. Any timeframes around data? And also, Chris, any thoughts around how data and research might be funded into the future? Sure, we do have plenty of thoughts on that, Jim, and hello to the West Coast. Look, there's some work underway already, because we did have the Minister's Data Hui that a number of people on the call would have attended late last year, and that reached some good agreements on the way forward. So there is some work underway again, led by PwC, on forming a co-governance model for the provision of tourism data, and hopefully that progresses and whoever the incoming government is finishes off that work, and we get a new
model for delivering and overseeing the delivery of tourism data in New Zealand, with the private sector right there at the table, helping to make those decisions. That's going to be an important step. We've also, the focus on domestic tourism has very much highlighted the lack of domestic related insight that we have. We're in the strange position of knowing far more about our international visitors and the international markets than we do about the domestic market. So clearly that has to be rectified, and Tourism New Zealand's doing a lot of work in that space already, and there'll be opportunities to do more there. Bruce Bassett and our team is doing a lot of work with a lot of the leading academic university tourism research academics at the moment on getting tourism into the science system, actually breaking down that door where we've been excluded from for so long, on how we can access funding for some genuine quality research into tourism and tourism issues. So we're really pushing that as well. And in terms of funding, the IVL, while it may not be the international visitor levy, is not bringing in a great deal of money at the moment. However, there is $45 million sitting in an account that we think needs to be spent, and we think some of that money that's come from international visitors could be spent on helping to get a tourism research capability up and going.
Great, thanks, Chris. Chris, there's about 3 questions here just around the STAP. So I'll ask one, but you may like to talk a couple of areas on it. Do we know when we can expect some results on the Strategic Tourism Assets Protection Program funding, the STAP, as the deadline was has passed and every day currently counts? And also, is there a list of businesses which have received the STAP?
Sure. Look, as TIA is one of the 300 plus applicants to the STAP, we're as anxious as anyone else who's made an application to hear the results. My best guess is that we may hear something next week. The Minister's office has certainly indicated that they are working on an announcement for next week. They haven't said that it's relating to the STAP, but one could presume it might be that. So we're looking forward to seeing what those decisions are. I believe some businesses have been told, out of the 300 plus applicants, some have been told they didn't meet the criteria. So if you received that response already, then you know you're not in the running. If you haven't been told you didn't meet the criteria, then presumably you're still in the contest for that money. So yeah, hopefully we'd hope to hear something by next week. We're aware, and the government's very aware that we've got a whole lot of businesses out there who've got important business decisions to be made based on whether their STAP applications are successful or not.
Right. Question here on the other party, or all the party policies. Will TIA review and publicly rate party policies in relation to the industry compared to the plan we're lobbying for?
That's an interesting idea. I haven't thought about that, whether we do a rating system. We also will be looking out for them. And I think actually this year, the tourism policies of each party should be a lot more prominent and easy to find. I remember 3 years ago, it wasn't actually that easy to find the tourism policies of a couple of the political parties because they weren't the ones being promoted, understandably. Health, education, housing, etc., where the policy is getting all the airtime. We may see a little bit more prominence given to tourism policies this time around. So look, I think in some way we will be rating the quality of those policies. Whether we do it in an official rating or a table, we'll have to see.
Right. And one here around the officials, alongside the politicians, are we doing anything to educate the bureaucratic apparatus that supports and advises the politicians with respect to the importance of better partnerships with our sector?
Yes is the short answer. I guess the longer answer is not everyone may realise, but the tourism policy capability within MB has doubled and possibly even trebled over the last 3 years. So under Ian Cossa, General Manager of Tourism, who we have a great deal of time and respect for, a significant team has been assembled. In fact, there are more people working on tourism policy now than when we had a Ministry of Tourism. They're just within MB, so perhaps not with the same visibility. and there's a lot of good people in that team. So we have a lot of confidence in the tourism policy team within MB. What we've focused on, and MB is in alignment with this, is there's still a job to be educating the rest of government about tourism. We're getting there, that's improving, but there are a lot of parts of government that touch on tourism, that influence its success, and in the past they didn't really have a great deal of knowledge about tourism or spend a lot of time even thinking about tourism. So we'll be working with MB policy on that cross-government approach to make sure that all parts of government system that touch on tourism have a better understanding of tourism.
Great, thanks, Chris. And a question here around the money, I think it says 200 million, but the money on guidance, transitions and advice, has that been used and has that been beneficial?
Because there's some confusion over the 400 million tourism recovery package announced in the budget and in terms of how much money is going where. And I'm not entirely clear myself on the allocations because it hasn't been clearly stated. But there's a $400 million package. It's not necessarily all going to be spent in the first year. So some of that money will be spread out over 4 years, or at least a couple. So within that $400 million is some money that's gone to Maori tourism. Pānea and the team's looking after that money. Some money has gone to Qualmark to run business advisory service. The government's just put in some extra money to extend that the regional business partners approach to providing that sort of advice to tourism businesses. And then, of course, there's money for $20 million has gone to regional tourism organisations. And then there's money, the bulk of the remainder, we presume, is for the STAP, for the Strategic Tourism Assets Program. But again, that program's a 2-year program, so some of the money would be spent in the second year. The early recipients of that STAP money being Waitomo Caves, Whale Watch Kaikoura and AJ Hackett Bungee have all got 2-year programs, so some guaranteed funding in the first year and some possible funding in the second year. So it'll be the STAP announcement perhaps next week, perhaps in the next fortnight, which will outline where some more of that money goes. It's also possible the 400 million is not it. The government has said that it's got about $3 billion worth of funding still to announce in the next few weeks. Maybe there's some extra bits there for tourism beyond the 400 million. We'll just have to wait and see.
Great. Well, thanks, Chris. That draws us to the end of the questions, and timely as we've just ticked over 2:30. Some closing comments from myself. Thank you to all our members for participating today and for your questions, much appreciated. And thank you to Gráinne and Chris. TIA's election action plan is available now on the TIA website, and a recording of today's webinar will also be available on our website by the end of tomorrow. Also, just to note, invites have been sent to the main political parties to attend a Discussing Tourism webinar to talk about their tourism policies. So we'll circulate details on this webinar once we hear back from all the parties. And if you have any particular queries for TIA, as always, please get in touch with us either via info@tia.org.nz or call us also to discuss. Our phone numbers are on the website contacts page. So Chris, over to you to close this out.
Thanks, Steve, and thank you everyone for joining us today. Kua mutu a mātou mahi, mō tēnei wā. Manakitia mai mātou katoa, o mātou hoa, o mātou whānau, ai o ki te aorangi. Our work's finished for the moment. Bless us all, our colleagues, our families, peace to the universe. Kia ora.